Thank you all so much for joining me again. This is Returning Retro. I am Jake, and I have another special episode for you today. A couple of housekeeping items. I am still playing around with the Big Me High Break Pro. It's going really great. It is my only device. I don't have any secondary devices I'm using along with it. Been a great experience. Full review coming. Additionally, a little bit of an update. I will be having a conversation with the side phone guys again in a couple of days, and I think that they have some updates for us. So if you don't want to miss any of that, please subscribe, stick around, go check out the Reddit page as well. Best way to stay in touch with me is there, or of course in the comments here if you have any questions. So today, oh, what a treat. The one and only Jose Briones agreed to join me for a little discussion. We go over his journey into digital minimalism, what brought him onto this path. We talk about the state of the space, the digital minimalism, dumb phone, retro tech area where he anticipates it will go, some exciting devices that he has been watching this year, as well as some very heartfelt recommendations that he has for everyone watching and everyone in general. So stick around, you're not going to want to miss it. I'll go ahead and put the timestamps in the description. So if you have a specific thing that you're interested in, maybe viewing more so than the others, those will all be listed there. I'll also have links in the description to the different topics we talk about today. So without further ado, let's go. Mostly, I just wanted to learn more about you and kind of introduce you to my viewers and readers on the subreddit, even though I'm sure they all were familiar with you long before they'd ever even heard of me. So, but yeah, Jose, thanks so much for jumping on Returning Retro with me today. It's a pleasure. You have acquired what I would call a bit of a legendary status in the dumb phone and or digital minimalism community. So for my viewers and readers, I'd be happy to just have you introduce yourself. What led you to sitting here chatting with me today? Whatever version you'd like to give, long or short. I'd love to just get to know you a little bit.
No, yeah, that's great. Thank you for having me, by the way. It's always good to collaborate. I'm enthusiastic about the people that will continue in this space, like that are important. So I'm glad that more people are getting into the digital minimalism or just more intentional use of their devices. Um, how did I get here? Essentially, what happened with me is I moved from university to a rural area or a small town. So I was studying in Michigan, and then I got a job in Georgia, and I moved. So, like everybody else, just kind of went with that. But one of the things that they don't teach you in university, whether it's undergrad or grad or whatever degree you're doing, is that life is very different in the real world. So when you are in a campus, you do a lot of things together with your friends and you hang out and you have a pretty active social life. And when you go on your own to, whatever it is, wherever it is that you're going, either you find yourself in a place where you don't have a lot of those social connections, and instead of replacing them with other human connections, right? What I did was I retrieved into my own devices, right? So my own smart devices.
Oh,
Um, and partly was because I was sold, and I think the large majority of people were sold this idea that you could still keep up with your friends, right? You could still keep up with your friends around the country because you have social media, right? So, I was chatting with friends, entertaining myself with, videos and whatnot, and I felt connected, right? So, quote unquote, connected. But over time, I noticed that my usage had skyrocketed, right? So when I was in university, I had a pretty defined schedule: go to class, hang out with friends, go to work. I had a part-time job at the time. And then once you're out there in the real world, then you have to balance all of those things. And I was probably in the 10, 12, sometimes 13 hours a day in front of a screen, either doing work or chatting with friends or communicating or being on texting threads. And I started to think, I don't want the rest of my life to be in front of a screen, to live a life that is mediated through a screen. So I'm going to try and find other ways to live my life. And that's when I started to pursue this more intentionally. Um, like I bought a light phone too. I started experimenting. I started to kind of like, okay, hey, what's going on here? How can I make sure that this aligns with the lifestyle that I want? And I started to ask questions that led me further on into the digital minimalism conversation. So that's been the past 5 years. Now this is my 6th year into the journey. And there has been a lot of lessons in that period of time.
I can imagine. Was there, I'm kind of curious, was it more of a gradual process that you saw building, like, oh, this is kind of a problem, oh, this is a big problem now, oh, how do I get out of this? Or was there a moment or an event or something that happened that was your wake up call from this dream you found yourself sort of unwittingly falling into?
I think the realization came probably once um, I went to the doctor. So I had noticed that my habits had been on the decline, right? So when I was hanging out with my friends or in university, I went to the gym, made sure to exercise, tried to be as active as possible. And then when I was in Georgia, I my life quality started to decline to the point that I had gained weight. I felt isolated. I felt like, there were some challenges with mental health and work. I felt less productive. So I think at the end of that year in 2019, I just started noticing my life had shifted in a year. In 1 year, I became an unhealthier individual by choice. A lot of them were my own choices. Instead of going to the gym, I stay home and kind of like watch more entertainment, get some Netflix, consume more to a large degree. So I didn't have a stopping point. It was just continually declining. And I said, okay, well, I don't want this in my life. I don't want this to be my life for the rest of my life. So let's take some ownership. Let's try to do the best that we can and figure it out.
Wow. Well, I think that, first of all, props to not only having that realization, but also the gumption to do something about it. I mean, I've talked to some people being honestly just a couple of months into my own, I guess you'd call it, return to form. I mean, that's kind of where I got the idea for the channel here and the subreddit of Returning Retro, of realizing for me as a teenager, the environment was so different in terms of the consumer technology devices that were available, and also the websites, the apps and stuff. So the development wasn't far along to the point where it is today, to where it was almost like the default was more or less digital minimalism as we would call it today. But I just thought, hey, this isn't great. This isn't good what has happened to me, what has happened to so many people around me, friends, family. And I kind of just noticed one day reaching for my phone for no reason whatsoever, Jose. It was just this habit,
Right.
maybe some kind of a mental countdown. I don't know how it all works, the psychology of it, but I just would reach for my phone and then I'd find it in my hand and I'd have a browser open or an app or something for no reason. It had become almost instinctive. And that for me was kind of where I was like, okay, this didn't used to be this way in my life or in just society in general. Maybe it would be worth trying to roll back the clock a little bit for myself.
Mhm.
And I've actually found a number of people by way of interacting through, I think, a number of the same circles or influences as yourself. Like I said, not to give you a big head or anything, but you are very well known, as I'm sure you're aware, um, of people that it's not something that they're necessarily returning to because they're younger, or it's just not something that they ever experienced, but for the very first time are kind of going back
Mhm.
to. Well, see, even then, I keep saying going back to they're experiencing this desire to sort of unplug or to simplify, or a term that I'd heard somewhere, it may have even been on one of your videos, digitally declutter their
Mhm.
life. How have you found the response from people that you have come into contact with, as far as, is it mostly some older people, younger people, kind of a mix that are kind of having this desire to enter this digitally minimal space? What's that been like in your experience?
Yeah, so I think there are three groups at large that are pretty well defined within the digital minimalism conversation. I think the first one is people who are just older. You know, they need some simpler device for whatever reason. Let it be motor skills or let it be age, right? Like, you don't need all of these flashy things on your smartphone. You may end up touching too many buttons. It's kind of like the same as a toddler, right? Like a toddler doesn't know what they're doing on this device. And sometimes people who may be advanced in age, and we're talking here probably like 85 plus, they just need something simple, right? Like, something that they can just call, text, and that's it. Not even text, just like phone calls, open it up. It's simple, you don't have to use it. And of course, that depends on levels of mental dexterity, physical dexterity. Um, it varies, right? At that age, there are really wonderful people that have been able to kind of like crack the code of longevity, and they still have all of their motor skills, they have all of their mental faculties top notch, so they could use technology without any issues. But maybe they just want something simpler, something that it doesn't tax their resources every day as much. So older individuals usually are kind of interacting in this conversation. The second one is growing, and I would say is parents and their children, right? So you become a parent, you kind of have this realization of, well, do I want my kid to have these same digital habits as I do? And some parents do, and they give their kids smartphones very early on, like fifth, sixth grade or something like that. And other parents say, no, there is no need for this to happen. We don't need this all the time. And as a result, they say, hey, we're going to not, or we're going to start engaging in a more mindful or meaningful way with our smart devices and teach our kids the same principles. So parents are a growing segment because either they're worried about their own usage or their children's usage of certain devices, since there are also dangers for teenagers or tweens,
Oh, yes.
in this specific category, right? And AI has definitely accelerated some of those concerns. So people are definitely interacting. There was the book last year coming out from Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. It created a lot of conversation among parents and among schools. I mean, it has banned a lot of electronics, not only here in the United States, but also in other countries. And there's also movements that are asking for people to delay smartphones, pledge until eighth grade at the very least, or further 16 years old. That's the kind of like recommended area. So that's the second population. And the third one is adults who, for one reason or another, they come to realize that they want a simpler lifestyle and they don't want to depend on technology all the time. They want barriers, boundaries. These are individuals who may have difficulty, you know, using certain devices in a more moderate way, and they want something that is kind of like in the middle ground, only having the utilities on your phone, having only utilities and none of the distractions. And that's another kind of like segment. And of course, there are sub segments in those conversations and within those conversations, but those are like by and large the broad market that is having this conversation and looking for devices that are able to restore attention, that are able to restore time, that are able to restore a more humane experience.
And that is something I feel is encouraging. You mentioned the anxious generation. This was something that was a huge influence, not even necessarily influence, but motivator for me to kind of enter the space, but then also enter the space as a creator, I guess, sort of to
Mhm.
kind of spread the word. Because reading that book, there were so many moments where something I had been observing was connected to the data. And that
Sure.
to me was so eye opening because at that up to that point, some of my observations had more or less just been hunches. And so seeing, Jonathan's ability to explain the situation in such an easy to understand way and alarming because it is, but then also have the data behind it so seamlessly. I don't know. It was a really terrifying but encouraging experience at the same time to read The Anxious Generation, and I've talked about it on the channel and on the Reddit page as well. So going back to your journey, at some point it seems like you made the decision to try and help others along the way. Just for my own audience, you've got the dumb phone finder, which I think is
Correct.
super cool. You've got a book, Low Tech Life. Is that what it's called?
Hmm.
Okay.
That's correct.
Confession, I haven't read it yet. I couldn't
That's
get it
okay.
here in time to read it before I talked to you. I wanted to talk to you as soon as I could. But what was it that made you go from, okay, this is helping me, this is a big improvement in my own life? You've talked about your health having been a big motivator for you. What was it that pushed you one step further to create all of these amazing resources for other people for their benefit along their own journey and not just your own?
The comment section. So, I mean,
Gotcha.
the
Okay.
reality is that I started just documenting my experience with the light phone too, and I never thought that it would go anywhere more than, hey, I'm just documenting my experience with the light phone too, and talking about my own kind of like, hey, uh, understanding of what the device was for me. So at the time that the light phone 2 came out, what happened was that most people were using it for a week, 20 days, 15, maybe a month, and they were judging it for on the standard of smartphones, right? So like they were thinking like, "Hey, I'm a tech reviewer. This phone is not a smartphone and it costs $400. No, $300, right? And it's not worth it, right?" So a lot of people approach it from that perspective, and I was just like, okay, that's one perspective of approaching it too, but you're not switching for digital minimalism purposes. You're not understanding that the device is a return to a different kind of lifestyle. So I just started to document my experience, you know, record videos and be like, hey, this is what works, this is what doesn't. Leave a comment if you have any questions. And then people started leaving comments and they had questions. So I just found answers, right? Like, so very early on, during the pandemic, this was during the pandemic as well. People were like, well, what can I do? What can I use? And then I switched back and forth, during that first year was a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of kind of like what works, what doesn't. So I tried this launcher called Ratio. It used to be on Android. So I started making videos on that because that's what, hey, this is my kind of like next step, intermediary step. And then I was just like, well, a launcher works and can be effective for some people, but it's not really effective for me because I just end up installing all of the applications again and again and again.
Yep.
So I said like,
Yep.
well, I'm going to go back to the light phone and I'm going to continue making videos on that and updating as my experience gets better and better and better, because the company had promised that they were going to get better and better and better. So I just made more videos and people started asking more questions. And then I started to look into other alternatives like, oh, hey, let's look into the flip phones, right? So like, okay, could a flip phone do the same thing as the light phone? And by and large, some can, some flip phones I still recommend for people that say like, hey, I just really want something simple and this budget friendly. And I'm like, hey, here are some of my recommendations. And then the Cat S22, and then that kind of just developed into like people started asking more questions, and I started to concentrate information, and I started to say like, okay, let's try to develop resources so that people can do that. And since this has always been a hobby for me, I never felt pressure to like, hey, like I need to make this X amount of money, in life. So I was just like, hey, when I have free time, I'll answer these questions. When I have free time, I'll develop resources. When I have free time, I start, doing some of this more on like a systematic way. They started to say, hey, what about this? What about that? Can you compare? And then I just started doing it, right? And then, of course, like I know that personally I could. This is something that maybe not everybody knows, but like a lot of people ask sometimes, and I answered this question. It's just like people think that because I'm a reviewer, right? Like I get all of this stuff for free, and then like the affiliate links or like that kind of stuff. But I'm like I don't. I actually purchase every device that I review, and there I do. Yeah. So there's a reason for that,
Really?
and the
Okay.
reason is because I want to be able to say, buy this device or don't buy this device and truly be honest about that, right? So essentially, the channel has remained neutral when it comes to earnings because every dollar essentially that the channel has made has been reinvested into like purchases for these devices. I mean, some of them are really not expensive and some of them are like, for example, like the
Right.
Light Phone 3 or the Mudita Compact, they're more like $400. So like, and the reason why I've done that is because I want to reinvest in the community, so like that's why I do giveaways, right? So like if I were to get a free device, right, from a manufacturer, um, then I'm making sure that I reflect that on the review and then I say like, hey, this was sent to me. These are my opinions, but I'm passing it on to you guys as fast as possible because I don't want to be biased by it. Um, so I try to always purchase a device whenever I'm doing a review, whenever possible. I'm trying to think of any occasions where that hasn't happened, but essentially, the reason why I purchase it is because I want to make sure to have that unbiased as much as possible and to be like, hey, I spend my hard earned dollars on this. In this case, of course, the channel has grown and it has provided, a little bit of cushion for those dollars not to come out of my pocket directly anymore. But what I've done with that is also, hey, I can give this device back to the community, right? So like I purchase it, it's mine, and I can do whatever I want with it. I don't have to return it back, but instead I can pass it on to somebody that may not have the funds right away to be able to do this, and they may need it. So that's something that I've done and something that I'm very proud of, to a large degree because I know that it will be easy for me to say, hey, X brand, send me a phone for free. I'll review it and, you know, that's it, right? Like I'll send it back and then, that's it. That's the end of the road. But keeping the device or purchasing it allows me to keep those devices that are really good and continue making content on them without any without being
Right.
beholden to like any kind of like sponsorship that they did to my channel, right? So like I also don't take any sponsorships for that reason, right? Because I don't want to have any bias. So the only way that the channel quote unquote makes money, is if you use the affiliate links. Like, and for me it's just like I want to provide as much value as I can and information and answering these questions. So if you're so inclined and you're already going to purchase this device on my recommendation, if you want to give back to the channel so that I can continue doing this, kind of like on a semi-sustainable basis, then you can use the affiliate link, right? But kind of like that mentality of why did I start and how did I start? It was just like the comment section. People started to ask questions. People started to kind of want more information. And I said, okay, I'm going to put, in the beginning, I'm going to put my own money, right? Like on the line. And then over time, as the channel grew in earnings, like I think an average earning of the channel is like $400, $500 a month. I just use that money to like, hey, I'm just going to reinvest and make sure that I give back to the community as much as possible because I know that this is important for me and is important for other people.
That is awesome. And I think something that you're touching on here is actually something I did want to talk to you about, that community side of it. So, one of my big motivators for returning retro is to one, provide resources for people that maybe have no familiarity with this space at all. But the other side of it is
Mhm.
truly to bring people together that are in this community or curious about this community. And I understand there are all these subsections of, some people call it, like I call it digital deliberatism, some people call it digital minimalism, some people call it digital essentialism. It's kind of variations on the same theme, but I feel the community as a whole coming together will be able to do some really cool things for the broader culture or the broader society that we're in. And so it sounds like that's something that struck a chord with you as well.
No,
Not
that's
not to
true.
put
It's
words in your
true.
mouth or
That
anything.
was one of
Um,
the motivators, to create resources, community around this topic so that people can actually go back to their lives. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why you don't see, like, sometimes I go through hiatus periods where I just don't post for like 2 weeks on YouTube, or like I don't do a lot of videos or a promotion or that kind of stuff, because I don't think of this as a business. If I thought of it as a business, I would be optimizing, creating reels all the time, doing all of these things. But the funny thing is, I don't want to do that. And the reason why I don't want to do that is because I don't want to spend more time online.
yes,
So like, it's like
it's a bit of a
this.
paradox.
Yeah. It is a paradox. And like, I recognize it really early on. I recognize like, hey, I want to, what I want to do is I want this to be a hobby, and I won't be like the most premier creator into this, like, creating all of these beautiful pages and reels and maximizing all of the shots. There are some incredible people on YouTube that make amazing videos on all of these devices, and I recommend them to a lot of people. But what I do is like, okay, I collect the information, I give you as many information as I can. I do one live stream a month where I answer all of the questions, and that's what I have time for. Because if I make this a business, right? Like if I think in business terms, then I have to like spend more time online, which is not what I want to do. And because it's not what I want to do, you're gonna see me more sporadically here and there doing the things that I actually want to do, and the things that I don't want to do, I can just reject them because I'm not like beholden to this amount of money, right? Like, a lot of creators have this gold shackles that is like, my channel is my source of income, like the way in
Sure.
which I feed my family. And as a result, I had to continue posting. And that's why burnout happens specifically on YouTube, because it's very much like, I have to post, I have to make money, I have to do these things. And I never wanted to be in that position, because the goal for my channel was, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do this on my own terms. And that's something that I think the community also needs to interact with, and something that everyone needs to decide for themselves, how much of this is going to be, like, over time, like how much interaction do I want to have with the digital world versus the real world. And that takes time, to, number one, know how much you want to do that. And it also takes time to create the balance and the lifestyle that allows you to do that.
Well, and I think that you've touched on a number of really good points, but one of those being, how do you go to the people where they are, namely in all of these, online places, without slipping back into those very things that you're trying to avoid by the digitally minimal lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I imagine that balance can probably be sort of tricky to strike at times. Would you agree?
Yes, I do agree. And the only way that I've been able to kind of put it is, when you're online, be online. Like, when you're online, be fully online. Don't hold back. Like, go to your websites, Reddit, check email, do all the things that you want to do. But when you're offline, truly be offline. Like, literally don't bring your smartphone. Like, I mean, depends on the solution that you want to go look into, right? Like, so there are many different devices that you could use. You could use an app blocker, you could use a dumb phone, like, you could, whatever it is, right? But whenever, like, for example, let's say that you're going to go to a concert. Let's say that you're going to go to a game. Let's say that you're going to go out to dinner, right? Be there. Like, when you're offline, when you're in the real world, when you're interacting with humans, just be there. Like, literally leave your phone in the car. Like, don't be pulling it out. Or I see this a lot, but like, people at tables, like, when they're eating dinner, oh, let's put all the phones in the middle, like together. Like, I'm like, just don't bring it. Literally, don't have
Yep.
the opportunity to not even have the temptation. Like, you're not being any more or better by putting it in the table and making sure, like, you give this kind of like, look at me, I am sacrificing my dopamine induced life by putting it on the middle and not reaching for it. Just don't bring it. Literally, leave it in the car, have a nice dinner, enjoy the food, no pictures, no, like, all these things. If you want to take a picture because it's an amazing restaurant or meal, or you want to document it for the future, okay, fine, no problem. I would maybe challenge and say, get a single purpose camera for those occasions, right? Like,
Exactly. I was just gonna say.
like if you really want to keep those memories, like just get a disposable camera or like, like a GoPro and bring it with you, because documenting that is very, very important, right? But my point is just like when you're online, fine, be online, go on YouTube, Reddit, do all the things, find the information, enjoy that moment. When you're offline, also enjoy that moment, and don't be distracted by all the distractions that are in this magic rectangle.
Well, and you've actually touched on another thing that is one of the things that I feel not necessarily completely unique about my philosophy with returning retro, but it's kind of more of a, instead of forsaking online spaces entirely or tech entirely, it's finding out the way to meet your true and real world needs and
Mm-hmm.
then stopping there. Don't go beyond it. Don't go sign up for every single new social media thing or app or program or get every single new device just because it's new and available. Find out what your real needs are. And that I think is a tricky part for a lot of people, is really determining, okay, what are my needs versus what are my things that I think are needs, but really they're just wants or things that I've gotten used to. And this again, I think is a big tricky spot for some people, because what works for one person might not work for another person. Going to your example of when you're online being all in and when you're in the real world be all in, I have found myself that I need to personally take it one step further, and some things I just need to shut it down. For
Sure.
example,
Right.
for me, Instagram was that was just a doom scroll, and the algorithm learned how my brain works. Poor algorithm, but it figured me out and it was giving me what I wanted, and I would just so much time wasting away looking at stuff that was not going to do me any good whatsoever. So you said something. Coming back, there's a point to this, I promise. In the comment section, people would start asking you questions, ask what was working, what wasn't working. I've noticed that there are two approaches to the dumb phone side of things. There's the software side and there's the hardware side. You
Correct.
mentioned some timeout functionality with certain launchers or app lockers or things like that on the software side. There's also, as we've discussed, on the channel recently, there's more baked in hardware stuff. So I've got the Highbreak Pro here, where it's got an e-paper display. So there is certain functionality that is very limited by nature of the hardware itself. Have you found one or the other to be more effective, software limitations versus hardware limitations, on people being able to successfully digitally minimalize their day-to-day?
I think hardware is more effective insofar that it completely blocks accessibility, right? So
Hmm.
like you don't have any crutch to rely on. So technically you have the High Break Pro. You could still doom scroll if you wanted to. You could still
True.
install Instagram, right? Like if you wanted to, if that's the lifestyle that you want, you could still do it. Yeah, it's going to be less appealing, but technically possible, right? Like, you still have a browser. You could spend loads of time, like, researching or looking into information and into the High Break Pro. I think what first needs to happen in a lot of people's lives is to sit down and project, what do I want my life to be like, right? So have that
Oh.
internal conversation of, are these tools actually giving me outsized value into my life? So I'll give you an example. I don't use Uber. Like, Uber has no value in my life. I use my scooter or my e-bike to get around town. And whenever I have to do longer trips, I plan with my wife and I make sure to drop her off and take the car. That's how my life is lived. However, I know that there are many people that have asked this question on the comment section and in other areas. What about Uber? What about Lyft? And I'm like, okay, if this is extremely important in your life, find a device that supports that functionality. Now, let's continue going down that rabbit hole. Okay, so I think Uber gives me a lot of value. Let it be because I don't have a car and I need to commute, or let it be because in my area, wherever I live, is kind of necessary when I go out really late at night and I need a ride. Or I travel from the airport. Like, I'm at the airport all the time. So I need, to be taken from one location to another. And maybe I travel to other areas of the country and I need that functionality, right? Like, because I'm not going to be renting a car all the time. Instead, I take an Uber. Okay, that's fine. We have established that Uber gives you a lot of value. Perfect. That's great. That's awesome. Okay, now how much value and how much are you willing to put friction on this experience, right? So then you say, okay, I don't have a problem with my smartphone. I use it pretty mindfully, and a few tricks here and there, like using a NFC based blocker, like I tap into it and I'm not going to go into my settings. I know plenty of people actually in my life that use screen time and they don't use their passcode to get more time. That's great. That's not me. That's why I have a dumb phone, right? So if you know yourself and if you know that you need this utility, then you need to have a conversation and say, okay, this gives me a lot of value, but I know myself. I know that software blockers are not enough. So I'm going to go into deeper software. Like, so can I customize it even further? And if you find yourself like, okay, software is just not cutting it, then I'm going to go into the hardware. And then you can start by getting a half and half, like what I called a transition device, right? So something like around the Cat S22, it flips, or even something super small like the Jelly Star. Like, it's like, hey, still a smartphone, but it's so small that I probably don't want to enjoy this content in this screen, right? And then if you say, okay, that doesn't work, I need to go one step further, then you start looking for the alternatives, which is I'm going to get a flip phone, right? So I'm going to get a flip phone. I'm going to have a flip phone. And because Uber is so important in my life, I'm going to call the number, right? So Uber has a call number. And I think sometimes people, what they don't do is they don't do their research. They don't go further into their understanding of what they need to do. But that's the conversation that you need to have. Make a list of things that are actually giving you outsized value in your life and list them from how important is that I have access to this tool 24/7. And the mindset, I think this is the mindset of a digital minimalism over time. Like, I've come to adopt this mindset. The mindset is there an alternative? Like asking that question whenever, like, is there an alternative? So a lot of people talk about 2FA codes, like, two-factor authentication. Okay, perfect. You want two-factor authentication. Not a problem, not an issue. Well, have you looked into YubiKeys, right? So YubiKeys are these physical devices that you can put two-factor authentication codes from work, from life, from everything. And they work great. They have NFC, some of them are USB-C, some of them are USB-A. So that is an alternative. And I think asking that question more often will return decent outsized rewards into your lifestyle. So I'll put this trivial one out there. I'm lactose intolerant, so like I don't do really well with lactose. I can eat it, but it's not gonna be the best time. But what happened is that alternative milks like oat milk, almond milk, like all that stuff is really expensive. Like, it's not super
Right.
cheap, like per fluid ounce. Like, so it's cheaper to buy a gallon
Comparatively.
of milk. Yeah, it's cheaper to buy a gallon of milk than it is to buy, like 32 fluid ounces of oat milk or whatever, right? So I just started asking the question, is there an alternative? And there is. You can make your own milk. Does it take more time? Yes. It's a little bit more complex process, but it's way cheaper and better, in my opinion, health-wise. But I found an alternative that works for me. Then I took it a step further and I was like, okay, well, instead of using the blender and wasting all of this time, is there a machine that could do this for me, but saves me a lot of the time to make it? And there is. So there's this machine that I found, and it warms up the nuts, like, whenever you're doing almonds or whatever, and it pretty much does the whole process and it comes out really, really yummy. Like, and I'm like, perfect, great. That gives me outsized value. I'm willing to spend more time learning about these alternatives. And I think that's kind of like the mindset that you need to adopt in order to kind of like start in the digital minimalism path is, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's make a list of the things that actually give me value. And let's start finding how far the software or hardware is going to be for me. I know plenty of people that use e-ink devices. They're great, they work, and they provide enough friction that they're like, okay, that's good enough for me. I know people that say like, nope, I still have access to these other apps that I don't want to have access to. So I need an extra layer. I need to go further. I need to commit further into the lifestyle, or the tweaks or the hacks that I need to do. So as a result, what you need to do is have that conversation and then look for the solution that actually works for you, because everyone is different and everyone has different needs. And I think that's something that we just need to understand.
Well, and it's
If it's valid, yeah.
yeah, no, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but there's not this is something I'm learning very, very clearly. There's not a one size fits all approach to this. And I think that you've just described it very, very well. Something that kind of kept coming back to my mind, and this is something I've thought about a lot as I've started producing content, is I feel like, and I'm curious if you would agree with this or what your thoughts are. I think sometimes people confuse convenience for necessity, or convenience for productivity. And
That's true too.
yeah, this is something where in the vein of returning retro, thinking back to what it was like in my teens, you had some smartphones. The iPhone came out, it may have come out either right before or right after I graduated high school. So it was like Blackberries were the smartphones, and then iPhone came out, and now all of a sudden you had what I would call computer experience internet on a phone. And that hadn't really happened before, and that kind of changed everything. But anyway, sometimes I think people think, oh, everything now is so much more convenient, therefore I'm automatically more productive, or therefore I automatically need that convenience. But I don't think that we do, and I think sometimes that convenience makes us less productive, if that makes sense.
So I think what you're getting at is the reality that people are not taking into account how many hours of actual productivity they do in a
Mm-hmm.
certain task. And there are plenty of studies showcasing this when it comes to productivity in the workplace. Like, most people that work 8 hours a day, that are in the office 8 hours a day, actually don't work 8 hours a day. Most people that are remote 8 hours a day, they actually don't work 8 hours a day. The reality is that most people end up working somewhere between 4 and 5 hours, like actually working, actually doing, work tasks,
Right.
instead of like browsing the web and a break, or kind of like taking a mental break or mental space, or taking a walk, or going to the restroom. Like, I mean, all of those things are taken into consideration in these studies, right? But I think what we need to come to terms with is, just because something is available, it doesn't mean that I need to have it,
Right.
and I think that that's just something that is very antithetical to what a lot of society tells us that we need to have, right? So, for example, in my work, like my 9 to 5, I work with nonprofits. So what I do is, essentially, I work in, right now I'm switching roles. I just switched roles in January, but I'm working in the resources department with financial seminars and personal coaching for finances, right? So that's kind of like one of my expertises. And when I go and I talk to people, community centers, I talk at churches or schools, I talk to them and I tell them, like, just because something is available doesn't mean that you need to have it. Just because, your friend and your, neighbor got a new car, it doesn't mean that you also have to get a new car. Like, you need to look into your own needs and what is actually good for you and what is actually going to give you happiness and value over a long term. Is getting a new car cool? Yeah, of course, everybody wants a new car. Like, it's a great experience, but is it for you? Like, is it actually going to give satisfaction to you? Are you really a car person that, you love, like, getting into this and, like, testing them, like, do whatever, like, and do you have the income, like, to actually sustain that purchase? And I think the same thing comes with technology. There are advancements in technology and society adopts them, but we don't ask the question, is this actually something that is helping me, making me happy? Is it returning more that I'm giving it? Or is it just exploiting my vulnerabilities for gain? And I think that when you put in the balance something like, I'll give an example of WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is a chat app, and I think it gives outsized value to people outside of the United States because it's able to connect, and they're using it as a chat app. The question is this extracting more human resources, or is it just a chat app for me? Because they have introduced functionality like you can follow people, and you can look into news and more kind of like content creation into WhatsApp.
Oh,
But for
interesting.
me,
I hadn't known that they had
yeah, there's
okay.
there's like a whole social media side of WhatsApp. But what I see most people using WhatsApp for is just communication, right? So, like, hey, this gives me a lot of value, or Signal or Telegram, whatever chat app you use, I just put it in there. So yeah, I mean, those applications are giving you value, and you need to find something that works for you, and that allows you to use those things. And then you put in the balance something like Facebook, right? So when it started, it was a great connector because I was able to see my friends' updates and stuff like that. But over time, it morphed into, hey, watch this content creator that you know nothing about, but that the algorithm is showing to you. And that doesn't give value to me because it's not my friend. So I think we as customers, right, like as people who are going to interact with these applications, these technologies, we need to continually ask that question. Is this actually serving me, or extracting from me my time, my attention, my resources, my life? And am I willing to do that trade off for the rest of my life? Or can I do something else? Is there an alternative? Like, is there something that I can do to do something different that gives me more satisfaction? Can I join a book club? Can I join a soccer or basketball or tennis or pickleball, whatever sport you want? Can I join a knitting class? Is that going to be a better connector than watching somebody knit on Facebook, right? Like, let's say that the algorithm is about knitting for me. Will I get more satisfaction out of going into a human space and interacting with other humans while I'm knitting? Or will I get more satisfaction by watching somebody knit on Twitch or YouTube or whatever platform it is?
Well, and I would, having done no research into this whatsoever, I would say that probably for 8 or maybe even 9 out of every 10 people, it's going to be the real world scenario that's going to bring more satisfaction and fulfillment.
Most
Not
likely.
necessarily everybody, but the vast majority. Again, that's just my knee jerk reaction to that. But that, I think, is a great transition to one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and that is, you said you've been in this space about 5+ years or so. And
Yep.
by this space, I'm just kind of lumping digital minimalism, dumb phone and retro tech, maybe even a little vintage tech enthusiasts where stuff still works, that they can still use the old stuff. Whereas retro tech, is new stuff in kind of the form of older stuff that came before. How has this space changed since you first started, 5 years ago or so, versus now? Has it grown, declined? Do you see it picking up steam? Do you see it kind of stagnating? I would love your observations and experiences.
So I think this year is the year of the dumb phone. I
Okay.
think there are devices coming out this year that will make it even better. That will make the experience for a lot of people that have been looking into alternatives even better. There are three main devices, and hopefully we'll see if one of them, the fourth one, may be released. We don't know yet, but I think the Light Phone 3, yes, it is expensive. Yes, it
Yep.
is a very niche device, but I think the experience that it delivers is very nice, and I think a lot of people are going to find a lot of understanding, and they're going to be like, yeah, I want that in my life, right? So it's worth it. It's valuable. I'll switch around everything and figure it out. Then you have the Mudita Compact, which is an e-ink device, and it's more like minimal than the High Break Pro, and it's definitely smaller, so that helps. And the minimal phone, actually, it's kind of like becoming more of something that it's a friction device. It has a QWERTY keyboard. People kind of want that in their life. Some people, right? So I think those three devices are definitely top choices for digital minimalists in 2025. And there's one more project I'm keeping tabs on, which is the Side Phone. They're trying to kind of merge, a very simple device, small one with a keypad, and these apps that people are kind of like, they say that they actually give value to them, like Maps or Spotify or Uber, some of those things. So those are four projects that I think are starting to gain steam, and they're also, I think, are going to be very successful. I think all of those projects are going to be successful because they integrate some of these principles, right? So like hardware, software. So there are different levels, right? So like you have some hardware hacks, you have some software implementations, and hardware and software, like so half and half. And I think that that's going to be, especially right now, in the zeitgeist. People are tired of
Mm.
platforms. And there's also another kind of component, which is kind of like politics, right? So, like, I think people have seen that these, creators and, owners of some of these platforms are kind of like have outsized influence, not only in their social lives or their technological lives, but also their political life. And we have seen it with outsized contributions from a lot of tech billionaires. So I think there's a little bit of that also fueling this reality that, hey, we want something different, and we are going to start dropping into these categories and having these conversations. I don't think it's ever going to be a mainstream happening. I don't think it's like 20%, 30% of the population is going to have these devices, but I think it's going to grow to more like 2%, 3%. And it's like going to be like a quiet revolution slash inflection point. And then we're going to get to, okay, now this is part of the conversation more on like a long term basis than a short term, kind of like endeavor. And yeah, over the past 5 years, it has grown. And more people are finding the forums, finding the Reddit, finding the Discord, finding, the channel, finding some of these resources. And I think it's going to continue to grow, but it's always going to be like hovering around, that 5 to 10% of people. And I think some people will do hybrids where, hey, I need a smartphone for work. I'll go to work with it, but when I get back home, I'll switch to my dumb phone, or I will use it for the weekend or for the vacation trip. Some of that stuff. I think it's also
I've actually
valid.
experimented with that approach a little bit myself. I can't say yet if that's for me. I think I'm a little bit more like if it's there, it's too tempting.
Sure, yeah, and I think like I said, everybody needs to know themselves. They need to know what's good for them. But I think that approach is gaining a lot of kind of like, hey, I need my smartphone for whatever reason, for work, or I work in Uber Eats, like, and I deliver, or like, I do all of these gigs, side gigs. But then when I'm at home, and then when I'm in vacation, and then when I'm in the weekend, I use these other devices that are better suited for, more mindful use.
Well, and I think the big something that's encouraging to me, and something about what you had just said reminded me of this again. I'd wanted to bring it up earlier, but I think that people, I think slash hope, more and more people going forward are going to start to realize that online isn't real in the way that offline is. You at the beginning you had talked about your own situation of where you felt both connected but also isolated at the same time. And more people I think are starting to realize the shortfalls that come with that, or even harm that can come from that, of being infinitely connected in an online space but being more or less isolated, lonely, or just unhealthy in the real world. And I'm hopeful that that is going to lead to more and more people finding this, what I view as a very great alternative. And it brings me hope that maybe this slow burn of the digital minimalism, retro hardware, retro tech space maybe will keep growing slowly but surely into the future.
So I think what you're getting at, and this is something, there's a sentiment, a little bit of a sentiment around online communities, that offline is the new luxury, right? That having time to be offline, having time to not be connected is a luxury because of all the technological advancements and requirements that are available in our world. I'll give just a simple example. Like, you don't have a smartphone, you go to a restaurant, and it's like, oh, there's a QR code. Okay. So it
It's
is
getting
quote
more
unquote,
common. No
yeah,
paper menus.
it is. And the reality for a lot of people, what a lot of people say is like, well, I cannot afford to not have a smartphone on me, right? Because calls, emails, work, whatever. And what I like to challenge and just encourage people to think is, okay, but is that valuable to me? Is that something that actually gives me life satisfaction? can I switch to a maybe more modest um, lifestyle? Like maybe I have to switch my job. Maybe I need to get an offline job. They still exist, luckily, jobs that you technically don't need a smartphone, right? Like, you can find an alternative for whatever it is. They are less common, yes, and probably maybe less paid. But what is more important to you, right? Like,
Exactly. I think that's the
is
$1 million question, Jose.
right.
I think that that is something that people should ask themselves more often than they do.
Yeah. Is money more important? Is this accrual of money more important than your life? And like when you look back, will you have the experiences or did you chase the greed? Or can you, again, is there an alternative as a question? Is there something that I can do to cheapen my lifestyle, right? Like, so that I don't need this job that I have right now and I'm able to do something that I enjoy more. I'll give an example. I have a friend, recently he became a barista and he's been having a great time, and being a barista is not very online. You go, you make coffee, you kind of are in there. Does he get paid a lot of money? No. Is he less stressed? Absolutely. He had a tech job. He was stressed. He was having a lot of mental things, having to kind of like take some leave of absences during the year. And sometimes he didn't even have time for vacation. Now he earns a little bit less money, actually, probably half of what he was earning before, but he has more time for what he wants to do in life. And he's not in front of a computer all the time. He's just making coffee, talking with people, having interactions, even micro interactions throughout the day that was valuable to him, right? And I think what you and I and everybody needs to answer is, okay, what's important to me? Is it the number in the bank account or is it how my life is turning out to be? And I think these questions come even further for parents. I mean, I've seen it like when people get kids, they start thinking like, yeah, like I really don't want my kid to have to not see me because I'm chasing the number in the bank account, And I mean, I get it. Sometimes it's necessary to chase the number for a season, but define what that season is, right? Like, so it's like, hey, I need the money. I want to buy a house, buy a car, buy whatever, but define what that is and, have that continual conversation with yourself.
Awesome. Well, Jose, I think that's a great spot to leave it. I'll go ahead. I'll put links to your book. I'll put your channel, Dumb Phone Finder. Anything else you would like the good folks over at Returning Retro to know about yourself or any final words?
Yeah, no, I think my final word is for people to take ownership of their lives. There's a lot of areas in my life that I didn't take ownership of, especially during my first forage into digital minimalism. One of the ones that I have been recovering over this last year is health. And I've been spending a little bit more on, hey, I want to be healthy. I want to make sure that I eating better and exercising more. So I want to have that longevity, and I want to make sure that I'm spending money into what's important to me. And I want to challenge people to think the same, right? What's one area of your life? You don't have to take ownership of all the areas in your life this year, but choose one. Say, okay, this year I'm going to learn more about digital minimalism. This year I'm going to learn more about finances. That's a big one, especially right now with all the craziness that's happening in the world, and a lot of things are getting expensive. So, you could be earning a lot of money having a tech job, but you could be spending a lot of money as well. So, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter much. So I invite you that you take some ownership into your life and that you say, this area of my life, I'm going to improve this year. I'm going to learn as much as possible. I'm going to make a plan for myself. And then next year you pick another one, or you just say, maybe it's 2 years. I'm going to take 2 years to figure out my finances. I'm going to take 2 years to figure out my health. I'm going to try different things. I'm going to live life as if it was an experiment, and I'm going to find what works best for me. So hopefully that helps you. And again, if you have any questions or anything, you can always come to the channel and ask, and I'll be trying to answer as many as I can.
Thank you so much for coming on the channel. It means the world to me. You've definitely got an admirer right here. So, and I really appreciate what you're doing for the community as well. So, Jose Briones, everyone, go check him out. Links will be in the description. Thanks so much for coming on, Jose.